Hey everyone, it's Stephanie. I am out here just outside our house. It is the most beautiful autumn day. I mean, check out those leaves. Oh my gosh. And I have this beautiful historic road that I'm walking along. But what I wanted to talk about today was to answer a question that I get asked a lot. And maybe you find it interesting, maybe you don't. But for me, it gives I think about it every day. And it gives insight and meaning into why I do what I do and how I basically spend the time of my life. And that is, why is architectural conservation important? Why conserve buildings? Why are historic buildings important? And why are the way that we look after them important? So my answer to this is that historic buildings are actually the most tangible remnant that we have of the past. So aside from things like period dramas and BBC TV shows and really terrible, Viking movies, we create our image of what the past looked like in large part based on the buildings and spaces that are left. So if you think of a castle, you think of a big stone thing with very forbidding and stone walls, probably maybe a little bit creepy and scary and echoey, but that's because your image of a castle is created by the castles that you've seen, which are all 600 or 700 or 800 years old, and they don't have any of their finishes on them anymore. So rather than elegant tapestries and plaster and painted interiors that were very warm and comfortable and lavish, all we see is the bare stone, which looks very sort of forbidding and uncomfortable. And we have this conception in our mind that that's how medieval people lived. They lived in big echoey stone buildings that were usually very cold and damp, when in reality that's not true. So all this just goes into how historic buildings create what we think of as the past. I think it's a pretty good example as castles. But I've always been puzzled about how buildings come to look the way that they do now. The castles are another great example, right? So how did that castle get to be, bare and stone and echoey and ruined when other buildings are still lived in or, have been restored or things like that? And the answer, my friends, is architectural conservation, right? Buildings only look the way they do because of how we and those who came before us have chosen to take care of them, right? And if historic buildings create our entire image of the past, then those decisions about how to take care of them suddenly become really important, because what you decide to do to a castle or a house or an archaeological site today will impact what it looks like going down the line, so that 200 years from now, the decision you made today will impact what those future people thought that building looked like. So we're living the legacy of that now, because we have entered a time when conservation is now, going on 150, almost 200 years old as a concept. So early, conservators or restorationists or architects, took buildings that were medieval, and in the 1800s or thereabouts, they changed them or restored them or altered them in some way that now we see and we rightly or wrongly consider to be the way that they looked, possibly. I know that's all a little bit complicated, but what I mean is historic buildings are really important because history is important, and they are some of our best evidence for history. So if they are evidence for history and for creating our entire conception of the past, then the way that we look after them suddenly is hugely important and also really exciting.